A nonviolent movement could not have halted Hitler's armies. Negotiations cannot convince al-Qaeda's leaders to lay down their arms.
In some ways, it's a very historic speech, and the president, I think, did a very good job of representing the role of America.
Well, the former House Speaker there, Republican Newt Gingrich, praising President Obama for his speech in Oslo, Norway, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. Sarah Palin, former vice presidential candidate on the Republican side, obviously, also praising the speech today. We're back with the panel. Charles.
Well, I thought it was the best speech he's ever given on the foreign soil. Now, I know that sounds slightly ironic and cynical because it's a low bar. But he did have a defense in the first third of the speech, which was the good part. A defense, a robust defense of war in general as a necessity, of the Afghan war, and also of America's role, as he put it, in underwriting the security of the world for 60 years, something he hasn't emphasized in the past, and that he did, and that was, it went against the grain of that audience of his, which was overdressed, overtitled, underemployed, one world Scandinavian lefties. And they only applauded when, in the second half of the speech, he gave his usual shtick about Guantanamo, torture, and the Geneva Conventions. He got the cheap applause. But that's old stuff he's done over and over again abroad. The new stuff was at the beginning, and I think it was a good statement. It's good that it came from him. That made it unusual. It wouldn't have been unusual out of a Kennedy or a Truman or any of his predecessors, but from him it was new and very welcome. Juan, a muscular defense of war as an instrument of peace.
Absolutely, and I think that's why Charles is thrilled with it. I was talking to Steve Hayes earlier today, and he's thrilled with it. But I got to tell you, I think that it's real to say that there's evil in the world, and you've got to confront evil when you see it. And obviously, Hitler required military effort. There was no negotiating with him, and President Obama said today there's no negotiating with al-Qaeda. And when he mentions the U.S. role, for example, in establishing peace after World War II, he points out that wasn't just done with diplomacy. It required the blood and sweat and life of Americans, as well as our treasure, in order to create that world. But when I hear this, I think to myself, he's filled with ambiguity, uncertainty. You know, Dr. King spoke of what ought to be, but he's speaking about what is. Well, what is we've been involved in a war for 8 years based on weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, and now we're involved in another war here for 8 years, and we haven't accomplished much. We don't know where we're going or what we're doing. He says afterwards in the press conference, oh, getting out in 18 months is absolute. There's no question about that. Well, what have we heard this week? His generals have been saying they think we're going to be there for longer than 18 months. So, to me, a lot of nice rhetoric. I think it was interesting. It's almost like the philosopher King Obama. The philosopher King was on display today, and he was resplendent. But to me, if you're talking about our situation today, I do not see it as a speech that helped to elucidate how we deal not only in Afghanistan, but we deal with the nuclear threat coming from Iran.
Steve?
Typical Juan, always taking shots at the president, you know, ripping on him.
It's non-stop here on this panel.
Look, I think it was an important speech in that it was the President Obama, who gave it. It was important, I think, to see that we can talk about American greatness. You can be proud of American greatness without being arrogant, and I think he pulled that off in the first third of his speech. I do think the speech went downhill from there, and the second two-thirds was filled with sort of typical Obama-esque rhetorical flourishes and excesses. And there was also, you know, part of the speech where there was a real clash between what he's done and what he's talking about. And you saw this dating back to the Berlin speech that he gave as a candidate. We talked about human rights. He said it again today and said we need to be on the side. We need to tell people that we're on the side of these movements of hope and history. And you think back, he said that in the context of Iran, you think back to how he acted in the aftermath of those elections as people were being, you know, literally killed on the streets, and we said nothing. We sat on our hands. So it was a disappointing disconnect, I think, in that. But overall, the beginning of the speech was good. It was significant, and he deserves credit for doing that.
Charles, last thing. Did he pull off humble?
No, he can't, but he tried hard, and he got about halfway there. His introduction, in which he said others are more deserving, was good but short.
That's it for the panel, but stay tuned for an interesting White House